Well, how did slavery exist typically in Israel back in the day? It was actually an indentured servitude. It was less than a slavery, like you are kidnapped and brought over and you're put into service. Rather, it was more of an indentured servitude or a work for a contract period of time. It really was. It was a contracted period of time. It was voluntary rather than starving. I would say, hook myself up with someone who had the money. I would say, I will serve you for X number of years if you provide for me housing and clothing and perhaps a wage above and beyond that. You can think of Jacob and Laban as being an example of this. Jacob leaves, Esau is chasing him, he's got nothing, just the clothes on his back basically. He finds Laban, he ends up coming into a 7-year contract with him. 7 years was the maximum. Right, and then so he gets in the 7-year contract with him, and then he gets his pay, changes. And Laban was a bad owner; he would have been rebuked under the Old Testament law. But there's an example of how somebody moved into that position. It was caused by poverty, not racial status. It was not caused by racial status, but by poverty. There was no rape involved in God's regulations of slavery. Firstly, because rape was punishable by death, and you had the same law for the slave as you did for the free in Israel. There was also no sex outside of marriage. So there would be no outside of marriage fornication allowed, whether they were a slave or not a slave. And if they were married, if a master or whatever you want to call him married the servant girl, then the Bible requires that he give her the full status of a wife, and he's not allowed to just divorce her. So he can't do this like one night stand kind of thing. No, but he has to give her the full status of a wife. So it actually elevated her rights dramatically. Here's one of the laws in Israel. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he's found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. This is an important law in Israel. Kidnapping was dealt with very seriously. It wasn't a $5,000 fine and up to 6 months in jail. You would die. If you kidnapped somebody, you were to be put to death, executed through capital punishment. This one law, this single law, would make New World slavery completely impossible, because so much of it was fueled by kidnapping. That's Exodus 21:16. Notice that if you're either the kidnapper or the guy that's found with the kidnapped victim, he who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he's found in his hand, he shall be put to death. So you could be the guy that has these slaves on your plantation, and you're like, well, I didn't kidnap him. Tough. This would not work. What about abuse? What about when the slaves were being abused? Well, Exodus 21, verse 26 and 27, it says, if a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, or damages their eyes so they can't see, he shall let them go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. Now, is God only concerned with eyes and teeth? Or it seems to be that the point is, if he does some sort of serious permanent bodily harm to this person, although you wouldn't consider losing a tooth to be seriously, but your point is it demonstrates abuse, then he goes free. They go free. They break the contract and they go completely free. This also would be really protective and really actually elevating the rights of those who were servants during that time. Verses 20 and 21 says this. And here's one that critics will quote, and wrongly, I think. And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. So let me dig into this, because here's what the skeptics say. You can beat them within an inch of their life, and it's okay. You get off scot-free. But that's really not the context of the passage. Let's look at it. First off, if he beats the servant and they die, he shall be punished. That is the word nakam, and it's specifically used regarding the death penalty. The point here is that just because you are the quote-unquote master, you don't get off scot-free. If you kill someone, you get the death penalty, and that applies if they're a slave or if they're not. So then they go, well, but if they don't die, you can beat them within an inch of their life. Well, no, let's read this in context, because we just read a few verses back that what? If there is a beating, a loss of a tooth, loss of the use of the eye, or something along those lines, they go free. So what does this verse 21 really mean? Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished. Nakam, he shall not be put to death, for he is his property. Because what's going to happen? He's going to lose this servant. So there's your punishment. You just lost the money. Say you had a work contract. I'm going to give you such and such, and you're going to serve me for this much time. Well, I've defaulted the contract. Here's your money. Bye. I'm out. And so it becomes a protective device for the servants. Deuteronomy 23, verses 15 and 16 talk about this. It says, "You shall not give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you." Let me read that again. "You shall not give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. He may dwell with you in your midst, in the place which he chooses within one of your gates, where it seems best to him. You shall not oppress him." Wow. Why would this be going on? This doesn't make sense, right? Well, it's because if the master was violating rules or being abusive or being somehow harsh or ungodly to the servant, then they could flee, and the other people in Israel are required to help them. To help them hide. To let them, oh, you want a place? Okay, let's try to help you set up a place over here, over here, over there. That was required under this Old Testament system that is, yes, it's regulating slavery, but in a way that seems to be only meant to bring godliness into the picture, to bring protection and bring help. But now let's look at the New Testament. What about the New Testament? New Testament slavery did exist, but it wasn't a Hebrew thing. It was a Roman thing. And it didn't have the regulations of God on it at all. So there are no regulations given in the New Testament because God was not starting a nation. There was no national laws given in the New Testament, but rather individual personal laws. How should I behave? How should I behave, right? So there's advice given to those who are slaves. That is not, however, an endorsement of their slavery. For instance, we are given advice if we're persecuted. If you're persecuted, do this, do that. Does that mean that it's good for people to persecute Christians? No. And so the fact that we have advice to those who were enslaved is not an endorsement of their slavery. But 1 Timothy 1:10, check this out. Here's another verse about kidnapping. It says, "Fornicators, sodomites, kidnappers, liars, perjurers, and if there's any other thing contrary to sound doctrine," saying the law is for these people. And who's on the list? Kidnappers. And this is a word that had the connotation of slave traders, whether that would be for a sex slave trade or for some other kind of slave trade. This is a wicked, detestable act, Old Testament through New Testament. It is something that no God-fearing Christian should ever be caught having anything to do with. And we should all be ready to stand against it if at all possible. The scripture throughout, it condemns the elements of slavery that made slavery so wrong. The kidnapping, the forced elements of it. It condemns the violence or the abuse or the rape or the sex slavery type of stuff that's gone on. It condemns throughout all that type of thing. And then it also endorses the fact that with God there's no partiality. There's just no partiality. Slave free, they're all the same to the Lord. And he will judge each one individually. Acts chapter 17, verse 26 says that God has made us all from one blood. He has made from one blood every nation of men. Every nation's been made from one blood. Even the idea of racism is kind of strange, right? Because, how many races are there? We're humans, there's that's it, we're humans. I wish we could get on a big lineup, just everybody from the whitest white guy in the world, to the darkest black person on the planet, right? And then have everybody in between, just showing there isn't this clear cut, here's these people and here's those people and here's those. We're just this great variety of humans. And there's really no significant difference between them. None. We're all made in the image of God. And we're all made from one blood. We all come from Adam and Eve. And so that discounts the whole idea of racism, which of course fueled slavery back then. What you've just seen is only a snippet of a larger teaching on the topic of slavery in the Bible. If you'd like to hear the whole thing, then please click here. Now, if you want to learn how to think biblically about everything, I encourage you to check out my channel, to subscribe, to look through the video lists and the series that I've got there, because a lot of work has gone into helping people to learn to think biblically about everything. That's my cat.